I regret marrying someone as immature as you. Younger women are definitely better. It's embarrassing to be seen with an older woman like you. If only I could turn back time, I'd redo my life." These were the hurtful words my ex-husband, Paul, uttered a decade ago when we were still together. My name is Jennifer, and I'm 48 years old. At 33, I tied the knot with Paul, who was 5 years my junior. We met at the hospital where I worked as a nurse. He had just completed his medical internship. Despite the age gap and our differing professional roles, Paul's eagerness to seek my advice and his boyish charm drew me in. Our daily conversations gradually blossomed into a romantic relationship. Initially apprehensive about the age difference, I was reassured by Paul's nonchalance towards it. 2 years into our relationship, we exchanged vows. However, after 5 years of marriage, Paul began hurling hurtful remarks, expressing his regret at not marrying a younger woman. He openly flirted with young nurses at the hospital, which I initially chose to ignore, convincing myself it was harmless. Then, one day, my carefully constructed world came crashing down. I discovered Paul's infidelity with a former patient, a woman 10 years my junior. To add salt to the wound, she was already carrying his child. His laughter as he justified his actions, his complete lack of remorse, pierced me deeply. Unable to tolerate his betrayal any longer, I agreed to a divorce and sought alimony. Naturally, this enraged Paul. He believed he should be rewarded for enduring our marriage, his sense of entitlement staggering. His father's indifference to his son's wrongdoing added insult to injury. With Paul adamantly refusing to pay, I reluctantly sought legal assistance. Having endured hurtful remarks throughout our marriage and now facing his blatant infidelity, I refused to back down silently. With the lawyer's guidance, I rightfully received the alimony I deserved. We parted ways, and I began living alone after terminating the lease on our shared apartment. Paul's departure to a new hospital came with more insults, leaving behind judgmental whispers that followed me through the hospital corridors. The constant gossip and knowing glances eventually took a toll on my mental well-being, prompting me to leave the hospital after years of dedicated service. It felt like I was the one being punished, not him. After a period of aimless drifting, I realized my love for both my work and physical activity. I needed a fresh start, a place where Paul's shadow wouldn't follow me. Fortunately, a small maternity clinic just 2 blocks from my current residence was hiring nurses. Following the interview, I was immediately welcomed into the team. Despite the clinic's small staff of doctors and nurses, the atmosphere felt warm and inviting, conducive to providing excellent care to expectant mothers. During one of the clinic's relatively calm days, a pregnant woman, referred from another hospital, arrived for her appointment. Upon hearing her name, which happened to be the same as Paul's affair partner, I couldn't help but wonder if it was just a coincidence. My suspicions were confirmed when she provided her husband's name, Paul, a doctor. It was undeniable. She was my ex-husband's current wife. Despite the unexpected encounter, I hesitated to reveal their connection to anyone else. It wasn't my story to tell. Days passed, and I found myself unable to address the situation. Then one day, Paul and his wife came in for a checkup. Paul's eyes widened in surprise upon seeing me, clearly not expecting our paths to cross again. Truthfully, I had hoped to avoid such encounters, especially in a setting like this. "What are you doing here?" Paul's accusatory tone made his wife realize who I was. "Wait, is this? Did you come here to harass us?" His words stung, and I struggled to explain that I had been working at the clinic long before knowing of their proximity. Disregarding my explanation, Paul continued his tirade, accusing me of stalking them and causing trouble. Despite being clearly in the wrong, his words drew judgmental stares from those around us, making me feel small and uncomfortable. Fearing for her and her baby's safety, Paul's wife feigned distress, insinuating that I posed a threat. With that, the attending physician intervened, urging me to leave the examination room to diffuse the tension. While I understood the necessity of prioritizing the patient's well-being, the encounter left me feeling shaken and unfairly judged. I found myself in a situation I never wanted to be in, feeling utterly miserable. With the details of my divorce now exposed, something I had desperately hoped to keep private, I became acutely aware of the whispers and judgmental glances around me. To add to my discomfort, Paul's wife, with a smug sense of victory, continued to frequent the hospital, openly criticizing me despite everyone knowing I wasn't at fault. As a patient, and one with a delicate pregnancy, I felt torn between avoiding further upsetting her and demanding the respect and privacy I deserved. In the end, my presence seemed to leave everyone at a loss, creating an environment thick with tension. Remaining there until her delivery, which was still over 6 months away, felt unbearable. Despite it being a good workplace, one where I'd found solace and purpose after the disaster of my marriage, I felt compelled to resign. The director's expression hinted at relief as I handed him my notice. Though I hadn't done anything wrong, I couldn't help but wonder why I deserved such treatment. Exhausted by everything, I couldn't bring myself to search for another hospital job. Defeated, I returned to my parents' home, my tail between my legs. My parents welcomed me back without saying much. For a while, I struggled to find purpose, feeling guilty just staying at home without contributing. Eventually, I decided to take a part-time job at a nearby supermarket. It was my first time working outside of a hospital, and surprisingly, it felt refreshing, a much-needed change of pace. While I loved being a nurse and found it fulfilling, the weight of responsibility in a workplace where lives were at stake was immense. Living away from that pressure, even temporarily, was beneficial for my mental well-being. I wanted to avoid burdening my parents, so I tried to manage on my own. Looking back, I wished I had returned home sooner. Around 3 years later, while still living with my parents, I received an offer to become a full-time employee at the supermarket. They recognized my hard work and dedication, and I was genuinely happy to accept the position. Over the years, I had been approached with matchmaking proposals. However, at 45 years old, I had no intention of remarrying, politely declining each offer. I was content with my life, focused on my job and rebuilding my relationship with myself. So I was surprised when the supermarket manager, a kind and surprisingly perceptive man, insisted that I meet this one potential partner. He, too, was divorced, similar to my situation. Despite my initial refusal, the offer lingered in my mind. Could I open myself up to the possibility of love again? I agreed to the arranged meeting, figuring there was no harm in meeting someone new. Considering our mutual maturity, we decided to meet directly, without intermediaries. Upon arriving at the designated restaurant, I saw that my matchmaking partner was already there. As I entered, he suddenly stood up, and in his haste to greet me, he knocked his chair over. The poor man was a blushing mess. Despite his embarrassment, I couldn't help but laugh. It felt like a scene straight out of a romantic comedy. "I'm Edward. Thank you for coming today," he said, regaining his composure. "Nice to meet you. I'm Jennifer." Perhaps due to the initial mishap, we quickly found ourselves at ease with each other. I discovered that Edward had visited our supermarket during a business trip and had been captivated by me at first sight. He had then convinced the department manager, who turned out to be an old university friend of Edward's father, to arrange our meeting. "I'd like to pursue a serious relationship if possible," Edward expressed as our evening came to a close. I had gone into the date prepared to politely decline any further advances, but unexpectedly, I found myself wanting to see him again. After 6 months of dating, we decided to get married. My parents adored Edward's kind and considerate personality, and they were genuinely happy for us. Our life together was truly blissful, filled with laughter, love, and mutual respect. Since we were both older, we hadn't planned on having children. However, life, as it often does, had other plans. When I turned 48, my health took an unexpected turn. I wasn't feeling unwell, but something felt different. I was pregnant. I never imagined I'd be pregnant at this age, and I certainly didn't expect my main discomfort to be morning sickness. I suspect Edward felt the same way when I finally shared the news. "It looks like I'm pregnant," I said, my voice trembling slightly. Edward, ever the optimist, responded naturally, "That's wonderful. So, who's pregnant? Do I know the person?" "Yeah, I think you know her very well." "She's right in front of you," I replied, pointing at myself. Edward blinked, bewildered, staring at my stomach. "Ha, I'm the one who's pregnant," I clarified, stifling a giggle. He remained silent for a moment, processing the news. Then, with wide eyes, he asked, "Wait, so you mean, we'll be parents?" "Yes, it seems that way," I confirmed, my heart pounding. "Really?" he exclaimed. "Wow!" He pulled me into a tight hug, his excitement palpable. "I can hardly believe it. It's a miracle." "It's a miracle," I whispered back, tears pricking my eyes. Later that night, after the initial excitement had worn off, reality set in. Is it okay if I go through with it?" I asked Edward, my voice small. While I had never considered not having the baby, my age was a factor. Thinking about the future made me anxious. Even at the hospital, the nurses, while trying to be discreet, asked, "What will you do?" I understood the risks of advanced maternal age, both for myself and the baby. Not everyone would agree with our decision. People might question how old we'd be when our child turned 20. The uncertainty of parenting at this age worried me. Still, I couldn't bear the thought of ending a life that had taken root within me. "What are you saying? Of course, it's okay. It's natural." Edward's immediate response, full of warmth and conviction, filled me with relief. I knew then that whatever challenges lay ahead, we would face them together. And so, with the doctor's guidance, we began preparations for our little miracle. Both our parents were surprised, naturally, and a little concerned. But beneath it all, they were genuinely thrilled for us. It was decided that I would give birth at a well-equipped, larger hospital in the city, known for its excellent care. The obstetrician assigned to me was both caring and incredibly competent, which was reassuring. On one of my prenatal checkup days, not only the obstetrician but also an internal medicine doctor was present, just as an extra precaution. Edward was supposed to be there too, but unfortunately, he had an urgent work commitment and couldn't make it. I entered the examination room alone. To my utter disbelief, sitting there, in a familiar white coat, was my ex-husband, Paul. Honestly, encountering him again, in such a place, felt surreal. Of all the hospitals, in all the cities. "Ha! Seriously, you're a 48-year-old pregnant woman, it's impossible to give birth at your age." He burst out laughing, the sound jarring in the sterile environment. The obstetrician and nurse present both had puzzled expressions, but Paul, lost in his own world, paid no attention. "You have no right to say such things." "I'm just concerned," I retorted, my face burning with anger. "A grandma getting pregnant, it's gross," he continued, his words like venom. "Is that how you treat patients even without the anxiety that pregnant women already face? Spewing such hurtful words is unbelievable. And you call yourself a doctor? What are you acting all high and mighty for?" I shot back. "Besides, this hospital mostly caters to celebrities. Do you even realize that it'd be better for you to leave before embarrassing yourself, doctor? I'll leave without being told. Giving birth in a hospital where doctors like you work? No way." "Yeah, just go, doctor," Paul sneered, pointing towards the door. "This lady is the wife of the Taylor Group's significant donor's son's wife, to be precise. Hey! You might not know her since you're new here." Before he could reveal anything more, a voice rang out, laced with authority. "This can't be true, but she's my..." It was Mrs. Taylor, the head nurse and, as it turned out, a distant relative of my husband. "We're complete strangers," I said, cutting her off gently. "Nevertheless, your recent remarks were way out of line. It's hard to believe a doctor would say such things." At that moment, the door swung open again, and Edward walked in. "Sorry I'm late, honey. My meeting ran over." "My wife was..." He stopped mid-sentence, sensing the tension in the room. He observed my angry expression, Paul's pale face, and the overall charged atmosphere. "What's wrong?" he asked, his voice laced with concern. "I was just told by this doctor," I spat out the word, "that it's disgusting to give birth at 48. Edward's expression changed instantly upon hearing those words. His eyes narrowed, and he turned his gaze to Paul, who was now visibly sweating. "You're Paul, right?" Edward's voice was dangerously low. Paul stammered, trying to deny the accusation, but Edward pressed on. "How can you insult a patient like that? What kind of hospital is this? I can't trust this hospital with my precious wife and unborn child." Just then, the nurse who had left earlier returned with the director, Mr. Taylor himself. "I heard there was some rudeness," the director began, his face grim. "Director," Edward interrupted, his frustration evident, "I thought this was a reliable hospital because my father recommended it. But I didn't know they employed doctors like this. It seems I chose the wrong hospital." "I'm very sorry, honey, but..." "I'm very sorry," the director interjected, cutting Edward off. "But that's not true. This man is not our doctor. I just fired him." Paul looked dumbfounded. "I just fired him," the director reiterated, his voice laced with steel. "I had no idea he was such a vile person. I only let him in because a friend asked me to. We don't need a doctor who spews such hateful insults. He will never appear in front of Mr. Taylor again." "Hey, director! What are you saying?" Paul protested, but the director silenced him with a look. "Shut up and get out of here right now," he commanded. "Don't ever come near my hospital again." Hearing the director's words, Paul sputtered in protest, but the obstetrician, who had remained silent throughout the ordeal, grabbed him by the arm and dragged him out of the hallway. The director apologized profusely, and we regained our composure, finally able to breathe again. We sat back down, but Edward was still fuming. "Did you kick him out because my father donates to this hospital? If not, would you have let a doctor like him run wild?" The director shook his head vehemently. "No, Mr. Taylor, please. That's not it at all. This man..." Paul, he'd only been at our hospital for a week. His father was my classmate, and they had a reunion the other day. His father pleaded with me to hire his son. He had no idea, he looked truly sorry. Please, I assure you, not all the doctors at this hospital are like Paul. The obstetrician in charge of your wife's care is an excellent physician. If Paul wasn't here, I would want to give birth here, I said, surprising even myself. The care I'd received had been exemplary, and I felt a strange sense of loyalty to the hospital staff, who had been nothing but kind and professional. Edward nodded in agreement. My father, well, he's the president of a large company with branches all over the country. He donates a portion of his profits to medical and welfare facilities. My mother, she was seriously ill when she was young and was taken care of by this very hospital. He donates a lot of money out of gratitude. That's why he recommended this hospital for your delivery. A few days later, I received a call. It was Paul, his voice a mixture of desperation and false humility. He begged me to ask the director to hire him back. If you ask for me, maybe he'll reconsider, he pleaded. I knew that he had often offended patients with his arrogant attitude and had been hopping from one hospital to another. I couldn't believe he kept making the same mistakes. His father had told him that if he got fired again, he would have no future. I couldn't help but wonder if his father's leniency had made him so callous. Edward was next to me when Paul called. He snatched the phone from me and yelled at Paul, threatening to report him to the police for harassment if he ever contacted me or came near me again. He must have been truly scared because he never called again. Some time later, I stopped by a convenience store on my way back from the hospital. And there he was, Paul, wearing a worn-out uniform and a look of utter defeat. Apparently, no hospital would hire him anymore. He was crying, his eyes red and puffy, muttering about how his wife and child had left him. Part of me wanted to feel sorry for him, but the memory of his cruelty, his complete lack of remorse, extinguished any flicker of sympathy. I simply turned and walked away, vowing to avoid that convenience store from then on. The following year, after a relatively smooth pregnancy, I gave birth to a healthy baby girl. She was absolutely perfect, her tiny fingers wrapped around mine, her eyes shining with an ancient wisdom. As I held her close, I vowed to raise her with love and responsibility, no matter what. As for Edward, well, he was smitten from the moment he laid eyes on her. He was going to be a wonderful father, I could already tell. I just had to be careful he didn't spoil her too much. Life had thrown us a curveball, but we hit it out of the park. We were a family, stronger and more in love than ever. And that, I knew, was all that mattered.